Welcome to another edition of Market Impact Insights, your podcast source for business leadership perspectives to help your business grow. Hear from experts in marketing, sales, business strategy, and more, with practical advice for business success. Make sure you won't miss the latest episodes by visiting marketimpactnow.com. Now, here's your host, Dan Albaum.
Welcome back to another amazing episode of Market Impact Insights. This podcast is all about exceptional leadership and the impact that you can make as a leader in your organization every day. And today's conversation is looking at some things that are really key drivers to your impact as a leader, including what contribution are you making to developing a healthy, sustainable culture. And we're in a very challenging, high dynamic environment right now, a lot of change in the B2B space. And so the role of leadership has never been more important than it is now. And it's all built on a foundation of culture. And how do we make the right decisions to tap into the new technologies like AI to really gain competitive advantage? And the role of having a clear purpose and values in an organization is also very compelling. And we're going to get into all of that with David Peckinpaugh. And David is the president and CEO of Maritz. He has been there for 15 years, but he has been in the event space for more than 4 decades. And he has strategic oversight at Maritz. And it's about the design and delivery of engaging and inspiring program experiences. And it's all about measurable results. And if you're not familiar with Maritz, they're a $1 billion plus organization that is all about sales and marketing services. They design and operate employee recognition and reward programs, sales channel incentive programs, including incentive travel rewards, customer loyalty programs, and also plans a lot of corporate and association trade shows, meetings, and events. And that is a critical part, of course, of B2B marketing spend. David is also, outside of his work at Maritz, a passionate champion for the fight against human trafficking. And he's been really involved in that for the last 15 years. We want to talk a little bit about that. And he's also received several industry awards, which really shows the significant impact that he has made, including the 2025 Professional Convention Management Association Lifetime Achievement Award. David, welcome to Market Impact Insights.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate the invitation and look forward to the conversation.
So you've had a really interesting career journey. What originally sparked your passion to pursue a career path related to the event space?
You know, Dan, it is pretty common in the event industry, hospitality industry, to somewhat fall into it by accident. And that's exactly what happened to me. I went to Colorado College in Colorado Springs, spent a lot of time at the Broadmoor, was planning to be an attorney. Dad, brother-in-law were all attorneys. Ready to go to law school. Life event happened. I ended up taking a couple gap years after college. Okay. And when I came back, I decided that law was really not where I wanted to spend my time, and happened to get an introduction through the alumni office at Colorado College to the Broadmoor Resort, hiring their first ever outside sales force. And I was the first person they hired. And a gentleman by the name of Chuck McGill took a flyer on me, and it just, I wish I could tell you it was planned, but it wasn't. And I fell into the industry and immediately fell in love with it. And as you kindly pointed out, it's been over 4 decades now that I've spent in the industry, and I'm passionate about it.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it amazing how some of the most compelling outcomes in our lives are not the things that we intentionally plan? I mean, sometimes that spontaneous circumstance, where we kind of fall into something. And in your case, it sounds like it just matched up with a personal passion and off you went.
It did. And I never wanted to, in sales, I never wanted to sell a widget or a specific, product. I loved selling what we call the invisible, which is you're selling the invisible, right? It's about product and service and and experience more than anything else. So it's really fit me and my personality very well.
So, when you look back and you reflect on your journey so far, what's been some of the biggest learning that you've taken from that? And have there been some surprises for you along the way?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. I think the biggest learning for me is that, for me personally, and again, this is my journey, has been the willingness to take risks. If you look at my resume, I made a lot of moves, particularly earlier in my career, and that was back in a day when that was not recommended. Nowadays, what they tell you, you'll have an average of 7 or 10 different careers really in your path. That was not the case back then. It used to be, get a job and hold it and build a career. But for whatever reason, I was born with that
Uh-huh.
adventurous soul and
Okay.
risk taker. And so the biggest learning for me is be willing to take that risk. And when I talk to people, I say doors will open. You've got to, I think you owe it to yourself to look in that door and explore, and then decide whether you're going to walk through that door or not. And those are the sort of the instrumental decisions that build a career. And I look back at mine, and most of the moves were good. Happy I walked through the door. A couple, I probably shouldn't have, but that's what you learn from, and it makes you, a better person, a better leader, better family, man, husband,
Mhm.
etc. So I'm a big believer in that. Surprises along the way is that what we were told is that you had to have stability in a resume. Really turned out not to be the case. I think if you have the ability to tell your story and you have logic and reason behind why you've built your career the way you've built it, whether by accident or intent, I think you can overcome that. And that was, if you go back to What Color Is My Parachute, which was big book back in the days,
Yeah.
it was really about more about stability and finding that one path. And so I think one of the surprises along the way is that that's not true. You can zig and zag and do things that make sense to you, and it's not going to hurt you along the way.
Yeah, I'm wondering, when you were making some of those decisions that in terms of conventional wisdom at the time would have been kind of outside of what was expected.
Oh,
How
absolutely.
did you how did you approach that? I mean, there had to be a lot of noise coming in. Maybe it was from family or friends, right? All saying, "Don't do it. Don't do it. What are you doing?" But did you have to just kind of intentionally turn the dial down on that and just stay true to your heart, or what? How did you kind of navigate through that?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just knowing yourself, and I felt confident in what I was doing. It wouldn't work, and I'll give you an example. I'm the youngest of five. I have a brother who's almost 14 years older than I am. He was an attorney, spent his whole career as an attorney, and I think he looks at me like some sort of crazy person.
Yeah.
All the different places I've lived and moves I
Hmm.
made, and that's just not his personality and was not something his generation did. But he was also great counsel and advice. And when I took my 2 years off of college, all those older siblings said, if you don't do it now, you never will. So that gave me some encouragement to do that. But yeah, I think, knowing who you are, what motivates you, where your passions lie, that'll direct you to make the right decisions, not all the time, but most of the time. And I just had confidence in finding that path and following it.
Well, you work with so many of the leading companies that are in the B2B space. And of course, we're in this just really interesting times right now. What's making it so challenging in terms of generating that sustainable growth in the B2B space? And are there just some considerations, some new ways of thinking that are really going to be important to be able to navigate through these interesting times that we're in?
Yeah. It's interesting when I sort of got wind of this question, I stopped and I said, I'm not sure 100% I buy into that. I think, I look at our company, we just had 3 record years in a row. In the corporate marketplace, which, we serve corporations, associations, and for-profit trade show companies. If I look at, where B2B really plays, it's in that corporate marketplace. And we had in our events part of our business, which is the biggest part of our business, over 17% growth year over year. And that's 3 record years in a row. So I think there are certainly challenges. Now, I'll put an asterisk on that, which says, as we head into our new fiscal year, which was April 1 of recently, we have a lot of headwinds that are coming our way, and our corporate market is actually down slightly year over year. And I think that has to do with the overall environment of uncertainty, what's going on, on the global stage. Currently the war in Iran, the impact it's having on costs and prices. In our industry, airfare is a huge factor. Airfares are going through the roof right now.
They are.
And that's having a huge impact on budgets. But, I think at the end of the day, and you mentioned early on the introduction, one of the things that we anchored on starting back in 2011 was our design practice and a focus and understanding of human behavior, neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
Our purpose of our business is unleashing human potential. So if we don't have that core understanding, how are we going to achieve the purpose of this business? And I go back to the decision that we made to really zero in on design. That drove innovation, that drove how we tell our story in a very different way, and changed the value proposition that we offer our customers. And that has been instrumental to our ongoing growth. There are challenges, no doubt, but I think, knowing and understanding what the core keys are to your business, how do you highlight that and accelerate those when you're in customer discussions? I think that goes a long way to help you address that challenge of long-term sustainable growth.
So investing in really more deeply understanding the behavioral science is really a potential breakaway strategy for companies.
For our business,
the ones that get it, can really address those needs better.
Yeah, I mean, our business, but I think it applies to so many businesses. If you're in a consumer-facing business, having a deep understanding of what motivates people, how they're recognized in rewards, what their desires are. It makes a huge difference in how you go about orchestrating your business.
Yeah. And of course, right now, the hot topic that everyone's talking about, they're thinking about it, is AI. And how do you see AI impacting how people in the B2B space are coming together at events, and what sort of future long-term strategy implications do you think it has?
Yeah, it's definitely has the opportunity to be transformational in some ways, but I think we look at it first of all as a people-driven strategy. It's not a technology-driven strategy, and I think that's a really key and interesting differentiator from what I hear and read a lot in the marketplace. You hear and see so much about the technology. We look at it as a tool. We're a professional services organization. Vast majority of our costs is in our people. So, you hear the old line, AI may not replace you, but you may be replaced by someone who's embraced AI. And I think the message we're delivering in our people is that you have the responsibility and the opportunity to learn, embrace AI. Every one of our employees is on Copilot. We're mandating AI education and certification for every single employee in this fiscal year. And the message we're sending is it's going to help you be more productive. It's going to help your work-life balance. It's going to help you feel better about the output that you have in whatever your job is, whether it's finance, sales, marketing, tax, et cetera. It can be a great accelerator of your work. And that's the message we're trying to deliver. At the end of the day, would it be great not to have to backfill as many roles or add new headcount? Yeah, that is certainly something we're looking at. But at the end of the day, for us, it's a tool to use to improve the productivity, efficiency, and output of our people. And it's going to have a major impact on their satisfaction, their enjoyment, and their engagement as employees of our company.
Yeah, you said something really important there, which is tool, to kind of classify this as a complementary tool that humans can use to get better outcomes, and not as a de facto replacement for the human factor.
Yeah, and I think, who knows how that's going to transform in the coming years. Agentic AI was really not a topic or a focus until just several months ago. And you see already the transformation of the digital worker and the opportunity that presents to companies. So I don't have a crystal ball. You hear other people making these wild prognostications, but I think our industry. I'll focus on the events part of our business. The desire to gather as humans, to connect in person. I saw a story on the news this morning about restaurants now asking people to check their phones in secure bags at the door and
Ah,
not engaging with phones during the dining experience. And you see that in schools. And I think, that talks to what we're all about, which is connecting. And what we've seen post pandemic is that companies are continuing to make those investments, continuing to see the power of that, and that's not going to go away. So I think we look at AI as a great way to accelerate those connections, make them deeper, more customized, more personal. But again, it's a tool. At least that's how we're looking at it at this stage.
and by setting that organizational expectation of skills development and learning across every single person, you're avoiding falling into, oh, we've got these two specialists over here. Maybe if it's David and Dan, there are
Right.
AI experts, and then everyone becomes overly dependent on them. And then what happens when Dan decides to leave? And so
Exactly.
it sounds like you're really creating a strong foundation there.
That's what we're working towards.
Yeah. And so many conversations I've had on Market Impact Insights with leaders have come around to the fact that one of the hardest things that a company founder or a senior leader in an organization has ever had to do is to build and then sustain a healthy culture. What's made the difference for you to be able to pull that off?
Well, I think you'd have to ask our people if I've actually pulled it off. But I think the question's a really interesting one, because if you look at culture, in my opinion, culture is defined by the people that walk in and out of our doors every day, or in and out of their virtual office or their home office, whatever their work environment is. They're the ones that define the culture. What I have focused on is how do we build the foundation and the framework for that culture to thrive. And I was lucky enough to join a company that has always been a people-focused business. I think there's some things that we've done since I've joined that hopefully have enhanced the culture, have accelerated and amplified the culture. And I'm happy to get into some of those. But I think it comes down to an understanding that it comes down to your people, right? I can say all these things, or put out papers or posters on the wall, but at the end of the day, the culture is something that people feel and experience. And I think that's what we try to address, is the human that is not just an employee, but it's a person who has a personal life, work life, and all those things compete. And so how do we address that individual as a member of our organization, and ultimately then that collectively builds into a company culture that becomes palpable.
Yeah, and you're talking a lot about people. One of the things that's come up in some other conversations is really the alignment between behavior and actions by the executives versus what they're communicating through presentations or
Absolutely.
town halls. And something that seems like it happens probably more times than we'd want to admit is maybe underestimating how closely our teams are watching our actions and always comparing it to what we said, and
Yep.
is this legit? Have you seen that play out in a certain
Oh,
way?
absolutely. I think, again, I hate to look back at 2020 and 2021, but that was a significant period of time for our organization. As I mentioned, we're professional services. 85% of our revenues disappeared overnight. And what I think got us through and allowed us to thrive coming out of the other side was our commitment to our values, committing to communication, to being transparent, to letting people know what was going on and why. We didn't do anything under the cover of darkness. And at times that was very uncomfortable. And there's no doubt that our culture took a hit. But I think our commitment to transparency, communication, empathy, and constantly focus on how do we build trust is something that has served us well. And we were able to get a number of our people back. We didn't get them all back. They were sort of got afraid of some of the industries that we serve. But I think we've come out of it, which was our goal, as a stronger company. And I think that comes down to the commitment of leadership and the fact that people see actions matching their words and behavior, and that there's nothing more that builds trust than that.
Yeah, and something you've been very transparent about is this personal value of, and I'm going to quote this: first, take good care of each other. Can you share a little bit more about that and why that's been meaningful for Maritz?
Yeah, it's something I actually brought into the company back in 2011 from a previous company, and it always stuck with me. And how we define that is a four stakeholder model. So it's our people, it's our clients, it's our partners, and our communities. And so we look at every one of those four quadrants of that value, and we take it very seriously. And we use that as a filter as we make decisions, like we did during the pandemic, as we do in budgeting, as we do in personnel decisions, as we do when we're making policy or any kind of business change. That's front and center and something that we discuss and talk and take very seriously. So I look at it as it's a great thing to put up on the wall, but it's also a great thing that I think hopefully our people see us. While we're not perfect, they see us striving to live to those ideals of really just trying to do the right thing and trying to do the right thing for each one of those segments.
Yeah, it's actually touching on something that I've been exploring and pretty passionate about, which is this idea of the value of a giving mindset versus a taking mindset. Because if we're thinking about putting others first or taking care of each other, it's a mutual thing, but we've got to be thinking about someone outside of ourselves, right?
Yeah,
In order to really
absolutely.
pull that off.
Yeah, I think the core word to me is empathy, and I
Yeah.
think I try to lead with empathy. I try to understand all sides of the equation. Ultimately, you have to make decisions. Sometimes they're not popular, and sometimes they're tough, and they affect people's lives. But our commitment is to the greater whole and to the long term viability and sustainability of this business, and that ultimately is my responsibility to the family that owns us. We're 100% family owned, and we're here to serve the family, and that's something that I is always front and center to me. And so we ultimately owe that family to do the right things and to run this business with that in mind. So that it's always front and center with us, and I think empathy is the key.
Yeah. And you touched on that as part of our communication. Sometimes it's not so good news. I mean, it's fun to communicate good news, right? We're all
Yeah,
celebrating
absolutely
and
right.
that's wonderful. But the not so good news, are there some best practices of how to do that and still maintain that empathy that have kind of allowed for at least getting through that with professionalism and still putting human first?
Yeah, I think from my experience is if you have the right story to tell, and I'm not saying making up a story, the
No.
rationale and reason behind a certain decision or a certain move, an acquisition, whatever it might be, if you can explain that in very clear terms and have a clear strategy behind that, we spend a lot of time talking about our strategic plan with our employees, and we try to anchor everything we do against that plan so that everyone has something to point back to and say, okay, I get it. I understand why that decision was made because it is driven by the strategic direction that was set out last year, the year before, or currently. So to me, having that anchor and it's the old have a plan and work that plan and then perform against that plan. I think are some of the basic tenets of running a good, solid business. So we always try to come back to that. And so I think to answer your question, it's around how do you communicate? Are you communicating in a believable way, as transparent as you can be, and with good rationale and a strategic foundation of what you're trying to message?
Yeah, I'm just writing down now and I'm double underlining it, David. Clarity.
Clarity, big thing. And people don't want to have the wool pulled over their eyes, right? They want to understand why something's happening. They may not like it, but I think we owe it to them to explain why, and we try to do that in every chance we have. And we probably don't bat 1,000, but we have a pretty good batting average.
Mm-hmm. What else do you think separates truly exceptional leadership from just good enough?
For me personally, I think that journey has been really anchored around communication. I think a mistake leaders make is to assume that things are understood, and I can't tell you how many times we've had to repeat things three, four, five, six, seven. The old rule of seven, right? You got to
Yes.
say it seven times for it to really sink in. Um, I take that to heart. Because I may understand something, but if I'm in a line, the person in the back of the line probably has no idea what's happening at the front of the line. So I always look at how do we communicate so the person at the back of the line, wherever that role may be in the company, um, that they understand what's going on, and we do our best. We and I have committed to ongoing regular communications. It's a monthly newsletter, video newsletter. It's quarterly town halls. It's a intranet that is fully active and engaged with really good, powerful information. And we have a bunch of other communication tools. A lot of things I do personally as a leader to connect with new employees, employee anniversaries, birthdays, that are things that take effort, but I think hopefully deliver that message that we are first taking good care of each other, and that's something that I've committed to and is part of my daily routine as a leader.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's this phrase or saying that's come up, several times, which is at the end of the day, when you think about your legacy as a leader, what are people going to remember? And they'll remember you not about what you asked them to do, but how you made them feel. And I think
Exactly.
what you're talking about is those connection points, those touch points that really are what people are going to hold on to and be meaningful for a while.
Absolutely. They're going to remember the time you ran into them in the lunchroom, or you remembered their name, or you asked about their, what something going on with one of their kids. And, it gets harder and harder. We have 3,000 employees, so it makes it tougher. But if you spend the time to try to connect on an individual basis as much as you can, it does make a difference.
What's the best piece of business advice that you have ever received?
It goes back a long time ago, and that is to ask good questions. Never, it was, listening comes along with that, but it's the power of questions. And I think that is really something that we probably don't focus enough on, but that really drives deeper understanding. It drives connection. It really serves multiple purposes when you get really good at asking questions. And that's a great piece of advice. Am I good at it? I'm probably pretty good at it, but
Uh-huh.
I can always get better. But that's one piece of advice that I've taken. The other one is, treat everybody along the way as you'd want to be treated yourself. And,
Hmm.
that's because in business, you probably are going to work with, for, or they're going to work for you at some point in your career, and always take that and have that in the back of your mind. Because you don't want to burn bridges. You want to treat everybody with respect.
The other thing that is really awesome that comes out of asking those really good questions is not just the benefit you get because you're going to get that deeper understanding information, but it's to the person that you're asking the question of. It's actually a pretty strong signal that you're actively listening and you're engaged, right? And so it's, again, building their confidence that, hey, David's hearing me because he's caring enough to be thoughtful to ask these deeper questions. Have you seen that kind of just really cement that relationship so much
Absolutely.
better?
Yeah, and because it allows you to connect on a personal basis, and you can't just ask fluffy questions, right? What we try to do here is try to get to know the individual more than the worker, at least initially, and spend that time about what's going on in their lives, and who are they, what are their interests, what are their hobbies, what's their family like, all those things send a different message than just talking about elements in your resume.
So, when you think about the future, what is making you optimistic?
Um, it is a challenge to remain optimistic, particularly in these days. But I think it's the ultimate good. This is going to sound really Pollyannish, but I think really at the end of the day, it is the goodness of people. I think the vast majority of the people want to do the right things. They want to behave in the right way, and If they're not, perhaps then it's our opportunity to show them a different way. It's the old, when they go low, we go high. I'm still optimistic about the core of humanity, and what makes us tick and what makes us, want to keep connected and to continue to build relationships and ultimately do the right thing. So it's that basic belief in humans and human behavior that I think will rule the day. But we have a lot of challenges along the way.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, and when you have multi-generational workforces inside of an organization, you got people at different points of their careers. There always seems to be some unique perspectives where you can blend that and have people working alongside each other too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about your attitude and how you view the entire workforce and work environment.
So, David, do you have any other final advice for leaders that are looking to increase their positive impact and elevate the performance of their teams?
I would find, one recommendation is find a cohort, find a group that you can connect with that, looks and thinks in a similar manner, and connect and learn from those individuals. For me personally, I'm a member of a group called the Tugboat Institute. This is not a promo for them, but you asked the question. So for me, I've been involved with them for about the last 7 years. It's CEOs and owners of businesses that are purpose-driven,
Yes.
and they're people first. There's no private equity money. There's no VC money. It's really committed to long-term private ownership, and organizations that are purpose-driven and people-focused. And that cohort for me has been exceptionally valuable. It has given me great learning. It's given me a great sounding board and a group of individuals that I can reach out to, whatever the challenges I may be facing, to get a different perspective and to learn from those other leaders. So that's been massively helpful for me, and I think is something I would recommend to everybody.
And I know you have given so much of yourself to some of these other causes, like the fight against human trafficking. And would you say that when you can go outside of just the daily routine of leading your particular company, but you're really offering yourself to help something bigger idea? I mean, that can be transformational?
I think it can. I think, it goes back to core values. We're very involved in the fight against human trafficking. We're very involved in cancer research because it has impacted so many people in our company. Things I've gotten involved in, I think, reflect well on the brand of Maritz and who we are and the purpose of why we exist. And so they match up also, personally with my interests, but I also try to pick ones that I think, reflect positively on the company. And that helps bring our culture and our values to life. And I think our people see that. And the number of volunteers when we started the getting involved in the human trafficking issue, it's all been grassroots led. I might have started it along with a couple other leaders, but it's been volunteer led by our employees since 2011. When we had a first show of hands who wanted to get involved, 123 people raised their hand. And that steering committee has changed over time, but it's driven by our people. And the same thing here in St. Louis, we have a great bike ride called Pedal the Cause. And we're our 15th year now in being involved in that. And we have hundreds and hundreds of our employees that volunteer. We support the MS bike ride. And, there are a bunch of other initiatives that our people get behind. We have 6 employee resource groups that are all driven by our employees, not by leadership. And all those things help, I think, bring your values to the forefront, your culture to the forefront, and help build the foundation of a business.
Well, David, thanks again for coming and sharing your leadership journey and reminding all of us to be intentional about communicating and engaging with our teams. Don't make those assumptions, but really connect and learn. And of course, 3 things: empathy, transparency, and clarity. I really appreciate it. Very motivating.
Thank you, Nan. I appreciate the opportunity. And again, it's my journey, but hopefully it helps.
And a reminder, please continue to give the gift of feedback that helps make this podcast even better. You can do that by going out and giving a rating and a review. It's so easy to do on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And as always, make sure to visit marketimpactnow.com for the latest in business leadership perspectives. So long until next time.